Hi, everyone. Welcome to I Read YA's North Texas Teen Book Festival Author Spotlight panel. My name is Tamara Fuentes, and I'm the entertainment editor over at 17. One of my favorite things is getting to cover books, so I'm super excited that Scholastic asked me to moderate this panel. And without further ado, I'm going to introduce y'all to some of the amazing authors that we have here today. First, we have Tami Charles. Her first novel in verse, Muted, was released earlier this year. Mason Deaver, who you know from their first novel, I Wish You All the Best. Their second novel, The Ghosts We Keep, will be released in June. Leah Johnson, whose debut novel, You Should See Me in a Crown, I'm sure you have all read by now. And if you haven't, you're missing out. You really are.
Thank you.
And now her second book, Rise to the Sun, is coming out later in July. Debbie Rigaud's Truly, Madly, Royally made you want to find your own prince, and I am still looking for mine. So if anybody knows, please let me know where I can find one. And now she's back with Simone Breaks All the Rules, which will be coming out in June. And Francisco X Stork, I mean, like, where do we even start with you? I mean, what a literary career. Your latest book, Illegal, came back out in August. And now your next book, On the Hook, will be coming out in May, which is so exciting. So welcome, everybody. Thank you for taking the time to meet with me and, talk about your upcoming books.
Thank you so much for being here.
Of course. I want to get started with kind of y'all explaining your books a little bit because, other than Tami's book, which has been out a little bit, nobody really knows what your books are about. So Tami, we're going to start with you because yours is already out. So there might be some people who have read it, might be people who haven't, but what is Muted about?
Muted is about a 17-year-old girl named Deaver and her two best friends, Shaq and Zali. And together they have this big dream of being a singing group, almost like the next Destiny's Child. But they live in small town Pennsylvania, and there's no way you can make it to the Grammys or the big time living there. So she concocts a plan to get the attention of the biggest singer-songwriter in the music industry, Sean Mercury Ellis. And she succeeds at that mission. He's very impressed by their talent, and he takes these three girls under his wing. But like a spider, he weaves a web and traps them into the dark side of the music industry. Deaver realizes this, and she tasks herself with muting the monster and getting her power back for herself and for her friends.
Mason, we're going to move on to you next. What can we expect with The Ghosts We Keep?
The Ghosts We Keep is all about Liam, who has just recently lost their brother to a hit and run. And the book follows them through this journey of grief and sadness and toxic friendships and trying to find this new sort of place in the world, this new normal. And along the way, Liam connects with their brother Ethan's best friend Marcus, and the two of them realize that they sort of have more in common than they may have initially realized, and that Ethan may have had some secrets that he did not tell everyone. And yeah, it's weird to finally get to talk about it. I think this is like the first time I get to like largely talk about the book, which is very exciting. And it's about, like I said, grief, my own depression and anxiety and PTSD. And yeah.
Leah, what about you? What can we see in Rise to the Sun?
Yeah, so Rise to the Sun is about two girls named Toni and Olivia who are coming off the heels of two really difficult years. And before they embark on the next journey of their life, and for Toni, that's college. For Olivia, that's going to start her senior year, which is going to be a nightmare because of a scandal that happened the year before. They want to have one last epic weekend, and that takes place at a music festival. So the book takes place over 3 days. And when they get there, they meet each other and realize in order for them to accomplish all the things they want to accomplish over the course of the weekend, they're going to need to rely on each other and the music more than they ever thought they would.
Debbie, you're next. What can we see in Simone Breaks All the Rules?
Well, Simone is a 17-year-old high school student, and Simone is pretty much reclaiming her time. She is eager to break out of the protective cocoon that she was raised in and sort of become the social butterfly she feels she needs to be. And her parents have set her up with a prom date that they have selected, but she has someone on her eye on someone she'd rather ask herself. And so she teams up with other late bloomer friends to craft a senior year bucket list. And together they help each other sort of reclaim the agency over their lives before graduation.
And last but certainly not least, Francisco, what can we expect in On the Hook?
Well, On the Hook is the story of Hector. He's a sophomore in high school. He's extremely intelligent, the captain of his chess team, a straight A student. And Hector's big dream really is to leave the projects where he and his family live. So it's kind of a dangerous place. And somehow he comes to the attention of the brother of the local drug dealer. His name is Joey. And Joey threatens Hector and basically tells him that he's going to kill him, maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next week, but he's going to kill him. And so, it is the confrontation between Hector and Joey, and eventually things happen, and Hector and Joey end up in the same reformatory school where they have to, Hector has to learn how to deal with courage and hate and see what happens with Joey.
Obviously we have so much to talk about and we don't want to give too much away. So we're going to try to avoid spoilers as much as possible. But, Tami, my first question is for you. This is your first novel in verse. It's such a challenge, I think, for most writers to try not even just a new genre, but now writing in a different style must have been kind of, a big challenge for you. What made you decide to go that route for this book? And was it, kind of an experiment for you in trying new ways to write and challenge yourself in a way?
Oh, yes. This was quite the challenge. I read a lot of verse novels. I just had never thought I would write one. This particular story is one that I tried to tell back in 2014, and I wrote it in prose. I couldn't get past the first 60 pages. I knew the shell of the story was this girl on a plane ride home who is retelling how she got, in trouble trying to become a star and apologizing to her parents as she retold the story on the plane ride home. That all stayed. But, fast forward to 2019, I figured, let me pull that story back out. The Me Too movement was going full steam, and I figured, let me try it again. Documentaries came out, headlines were bursting about these very important stories of Black and brown girls in the entertainment industry. I, once upon a time, used to sing in a singing group. It was the time of my life. And I figured, well, what if I reframe it and this girl just wants to be a singer? And what if she's in a singing group? And what if she's a songwriter? Ooh, I have to make this in verse. And I got to write some songs too for her. So it became a fun way to write about such heavy topics. And I'm glad I tried it. I don't know if I'll do it again, though. It was hard.
I mean, I think it's fascinating that you had mentioned, you got to write songs for this book. You got to, really try a brand new style. How you got to take kind of almost your experiences as well into this and your skills. What was there a certain book or a certain author that you had talked to try to figure out, how to make this work in this new way or sparked something that made you think that this might be the way that the story would work?
Yeah, so I have to give a huge shout out to Margarita Engel. She is a Cuban-American author who that is her specialty, verse anything. And she's a beautiful poet. And she really was so patient with me and held my hand through the process. So she mentored me through the manuscript, but I also read a lot of poetry. Maya Angelou is one of my favorites, and Rupi Kaur. So between those three, I've made it work, I think.
Oh, I love that. Leah, you should see me in a crown. I mean, like I had mentioned before, blew us literally all away. I loved it so much. It was one of our best YA books on 17. So it really such a joy. And it's funny because, thinking of the timing of both of your books, I mean, we're in a pandemic. Your first book came out when, proms and things weren't really happening to teens. Now, Rise to the Sun, music festivals, not really a thing that we're going to right now. How has it been kind of writing these experiences that are not really happening, but we're all looking forward to in a way, and kind of putting it in context for teens who might have not had that experience at all yet?
For sure, for sure. I just want to start by saying, never let it be said that Leah Johnson is not a master of immaculate timing. 2 books during a pandemic. Oh, chef's kiss. Absolutely incredible. Couldn't have asked for a better path. I'll say that for me personally, it's been a real reprieve from what's going on in the world to be able to disappear into these books for the past couple of years, actually. Especially when You Should See Me in a Crown came out. Obviously, we were in the midst of not only a pandemic, but racial reckoning in this country in the fight for justice for Black lives. And so it was a really fraught time to be talking specifically about this idea of Black joy and Black life and Black love even. And so it was honestly such a gift to be able to disappear into that for a while and be able to have so many conversations with other people and other writers and readers about the kind of world that we can make if only we are all able to work towards this idea of love without shame and life without fear of being persecuted for who you are. And so in that way, it was a real gift to be able to do that. And I hope that with the number of prom-themed events we did last summer, I hope that it gave some prom back to some people who didn't get to have theirs. But, Rise to the Sun is a similar situation. I think one thing that people say all the time is like, oh, the time is now. Like, this book couldn't be better for the moment. It couldn't be better suited for the moment. And it's so urgent. I honestly think it's urgent always to tell stories about Black lives and Black girlhood and about emerging queerness, right? And so it feels really prescient to me to be able to do this right now at where we are situated in history. But I think that telling stories about communal joy, which is really what, at the core of Rise to the Sun is about, I think being able to tell those stories it's always going to feel as urgent to me as it does right now. And so I hope in this way that we get bits and pieces of our summer back. Like, we're not going to go to Coachella this year, but maybe you can go to Farmland and it'll feel a little bit like you're at Coachella if you just close your eyes and listen to the audiobook and disappear into the image, So yeah, definitely trying to create experiences for readers.
I mean, I think it's interesting because I'm sure a lot of teens who are going to be watching this are probably thinking you write a book, you submit it, and it goes out fairly quickly. And that's not how books work. I mean, there is a very long process into the, ride of publication. So can you give us a little bit of the timeline? I'm sure you, especially with You Should See Me in a Crowd, you wrote that pre-pandemic. So you probably never expected this to happen. So has it been kind of that ride also and kind of seeing it come out in a time that you weren't expecting?
Yeah. I'm looking at Mason's face when you were like, oh, we just kind of, people think we just kind of put the books out because they know this is a struggle every step of the way. And so I started writing You Should See Me in a Crown in 2018, which was pre everything. It was pre-pandemic. It was pre my own coming out. It was pre it was a totally different world and a different life that I was existing in at that time. And so it sold in 2018. I wrote it. And then 2 years later, we put it out. And so Rise to the Sun was on a slightly more, condensed timeline, which is that I submitted my first draft in January of 2020. So we were still pre-pandemic, had no idea that this was what was going to happen. But I wrote the entirety of that book, rewrote it a couple times, revised it, edited it, almost entirely in my bedroom. I'm writing about a world that no longer exists within these 4 walls because I went home to my parents' house of my childhood bedroom of all places. And so it's a really strange experience to be writing what we call contemporary YA in a world that actually is not the world that we live in. And so people keep asking how are you guys handling masks in your work? Are you guys talking about social distancing? What do you, no. My book takes place in 2021. but it might be speculative fiction because this is a 2021 where nobody wears masks. We touch each other. People kissing at music festivals. Nobody's showering. There's no hand washing. It's just disgusting, but I love it.
It's a 2021 alternative universe that we're all wishing we were in right now.
Right. Imagine this as an AU on AO3 and it'll make a lot more sense.
There we go. That's all the tags that you need to know everything about this novel. Debbie, your last novel, I mean, it was sort of like this fantasy contemporary novel that we all wish we could live in and everything. But this new one is, so it's kind of like the other side of the coin. I mean, this is a very real experience, especially for, I'm a first generation American, my parents had immigrated here. So, reading it, it felt very like, almost like my life come into like these words through these pages. How much of your own experience did you put it, into it as you were writing? And what are you expecting from people who are going to read it for the first time, later on and kind of see their own experiences within it?
Oh, I put a lot of my, of what I remember, friends and myself going through. But this is definitely a book that I had to get out of my system, like otherwise it would haunt me because I really wanted to express these things. I grew up watching teen sitcoms and like looking at like what I thought how most teens in this country, how they live, like, people coming through their window, your bedroom window, like Zach and Jesse, or like parents going away on vacation without you, having a house party or tons of sleepovers. And for Simone, I feel like she looks at this situation and says, well, what is this protective cocoon? What is this robbing me of? Is this robbing me of opportunity? Is it robbing me of, just that lived experience, a character built from lived experience? Is it robbing me of, getting a head start on my goals? There are stories of like your favorite pop icon, like coming to New York at age 18 with not knowing a soul, with $10 in their pocket, So these are all the things that actually, weighs on her. And she looks at it in that way. She's sort of a history buff, and she like starts collecting teen achievements through time from Joan of Arc on down. And so this is what's buzzing in her head when she decides, like, what, now that I see, the foreseeable future panning out where my parents are expecting me to now go to college, but stay at home, like just commute to college. I got to do something. And, she also looks at her older sister and examines how her life is going and is like, no, that's not going to be me. And I can totally relate because growing up, my older sisters kind of like followed that, track. I mean, they love what they do. They're both physicians, but they definitely, it's a career that I feel like my parents really like influenced them to go that way. And so, I mean, for the third kid down the line, I was kind of like so huge surprise to them. I was like, I'm not straightening my hair. I'm doing, like, I just was like, this is me. And so I was like eager to just put that on the pages because I see that there's a lot of things that are happening still to this day that a lot of kids are talking about, joking about on social media or what have you. But it's definitely something that I hope, like you said, a lot of kids can relate to.
Yeah, especially, we see, as you had mentioned before, Simone makes her own bucket list to kind of, fulfill these, ideas of the ideal teen experience that she believes that should be happening in her life that she's missing out on because of her parents. Did you have a bucket list when you were growing up, or do you wish you had one and kind of, took the step that Simone took in her book with the bravery that she had of, kind of going against the grain a little bit earlier in her life? I'm
too much of a pantser. I'm not that much of a planner to have had a list. But, I clearly was different in the fact that, I just was like, my mom said that, like, I was the first teen daughter, like teenage issues, like daughter and I'm like, well, I loved history like her. Like, I loved African history and learning about, the greatness that we contributed to society. but I didn't have a list. I just was like, I had a strong intuition, like a strong spirit, I think, even though I'm like a people pleaser and, nice that everybody was like, she's so nice and very giving and doing things for my family. Like I would like drive them everywhere as soon as I got a license, but they can definitely see that I was alternative.
Yeah, for sure. Francisco, I mean, On the Hook is incredible. I got the chance to read it and it was fantastic. But one thing that like super fascinated me as I was researching was the amount of time that it took you to write this book. You had written in a blog post that, this is an idea that you've had for so long and you tried and it didn't necessarily fit. And now finally, you made it work and it made it happen. And now it's finally going to come out. Can you elaborate more on that process and what made you discover that now was the right time to tell this story?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's just, I finally think I got it right after a lot of trial and errors. The book, the first time I started writing it, where my kids were teenagers. I was like maybe 50. So it's like a while back. And it's one of those things that if you look at books in terms of like a combination of kind of the mentality that goes in the author's head and the craft that, I think that this book just never, I never had the necessary craft, to bring this book into a way that was accessible to other kids. Although it was a book that I wrote for my teenage kids, largely based on my own experiences in growing in the projects of El Paso and sort of being afraid all the time and dealing with like this feelings of cowardice that I had, because I didn't want to, I was always hiding and never wanted to be in the radar, and discovering what courage is and in just being who you are and showing people that you're smart and you like to write and so forth. So there was a lot there, it just took me many years, not writing continuously, but writing and then listening to the text and figuring out that it just wasn't right, putting it away and coming back. And I think that I needed to write a few more books, before I could come back and use that other kind of what I learned about craft to make this book something that is accessible to young people. Especially, what I had in mind was young men at risk, kids that are not necessarily great readers, but who relate to this, to the anger and the hatred and that Hector feels, and how does one get unhooked, from these feelings of vengeance and hatred, and I see that so prevalent in our society today. So much anger and so much hatred, even when we think that is justified, it's still something that is very corrosive, not only to ourselves and to others. So I think it just took a while, to put it together. I'm just glad I lived long enough to to be able to do it.
Me too, because it's absolutely fantastic. I think it's interesting that you had mentioned, that it just wasn't the right time and you wanted to grow more as a writer. And particularly, I feel like a lot of younger people feel like they need to write their story right now and get it out as soon as possible, because then later on, they're never going to get the chance ever again. And, it's like you have to start as early as you can as a writer. What made you realize that, it's time to step back? And, what do you want to share with teens in the aspect of like, sometimes you do need to step back from a story. It isn't the time to share it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I think that you have to look at writing as a way of life. Not just this particular book or publication and so forth, but something that you're willing to do all your life, and hopefully you will be able to share the book with others through publication, and sometimes you will be able to share it with hundreds of thousands, and sometimes it'll be just a couple of dozen, I mean, and so you got to be happy with that. I think that if you see your life really kind of as this is what I'm called to do, and I would be unhappy if I didn't do it, then it's a long-term, it's a long-term situation. And every book, even a failure, is just a practice. It can be a practice for another one, and so I, eventually I I learned that it didn't come right away. It's just something that you learn through many years of experience. And so that's the advice that I would give to young people is and also to listen to there's an inner voice that tells you when the book is not right, or when the book has not reached its potential, and you kind of want to rush it and put it out there. But if you listen to this little voice, it'll tell you that maybe I have more work to do.
Mason, I mean, your book is fantastic.
Thank you.
Broke my heart in so many different pieces. Can we talk a little bit about kind of like your experiences? Because as you said, a lot of the experiences for you in writing this novel was very therapeutic. I mean, what made you want to tell kind of sort of, I'm sure for a lot of readers will probably be surprised that this is a darker story for you.
It's a darker story. It's a dark story in the sense that it's just very difficult. Once you have hatred inside of you, I mean, once it kind of takes over you, and it's almost, hatred and forgiveness and all of those things are just incredibly difficult to leave behind, to get rid of, and I think that personally, I struggle with that all my life. A lot of it just the anger is a result of depression and anger at yourself, and anger at others. It's just a result of it's a mental illness, and so it's that struggle of trying to find a way to get unhooked. It's kind of addictive, it's in some ways, because it also gives you like a reason to live when you're hating something. You have something to get up in the morning, and so I think that the way to do it, it's just to maintain the intensity and to maintain your willingness to fight for things that are wrong, at the same time, to do it in a way that is unifying. It's just something that is very difficult.
Yeah. Mason, I mean, I wish you all the best. A lot of people, I'm sure, related, to it in a way. And now your second novel, The Ghost We Keep, I mean, you wrote an Instagram post basically apologizing to people for all the feelings that they're definitely going to feel. I mean, I felt them, it felt like you really don't know what to expect when you're kind of going into the novel, and that Instagram post felt like the right warning for me, but at the same time did not do enough justice because I was in tears. Can you talk a little bit about the experience of creating, this novel, and especially as you had mentioned, it was very fulfilling for you in writing it as you kind of go through your own journey. Is this possibly your most personal book yet in terms of what you have gone through, and how was it writing it? And now, I'm sure it's even scarier because of how personal it is to share it with the world.
Yeah, I used to think that I Wish You All the Best would be the most personal book that I wrote because it has so much of my anxiety and my dysphoria, and like the things that I've experienced. But writing The Ghost We Keep, I think I'll probably actually get in trouble with some of my family for writing things the way that I did, because it's incredibly personal, down to like some of the settings and the relationship. It's my experience. And like I guess I can speak to this now because like this was not my second book. This was not in the plan for that. My second book was going to be what I'm writing now. But then my father died in 2017 in much the same way that Ethan dies in the book, and I carried that with me for a very long time, and I still do to this day. There are things rattling around in my own brain that could probably use a good talking about, but writing is therapy. But yeah, I knew that I needed this out of me. I knew that I needed this story. For me, writing is a form of therapy. It's how I can work out things with myself, things in my own brain, and probably not the healthiest, but it is free in a way. Healthcare. But yeah, I knew that I needed to. Sorry, Leah.
Me and Leah were like, yes.
Yeah.
I feel like
Me and Mason be going through it, okay? Every time they post something on Instagram, I'm like, yep, same wavelength.
Every time. But no, like, yeah, it's what I had to write. And, it's different from I Wish You All the Best. It's different from what book 3 will be. Those are very like romance heavy stories, and there's no romance in The Ghost We Keep. And that's, purposeful and scary, because I do feel like there is an expectation. Like, thinking about everything that I've written, every book and short story has always had some kind of romantic element to it. And I like writing romance. I like writing people in love and figuring out that they're in love and falling in love. But with The Ghost We Keep, it was just a story about grief. It was just a story about depression and post-traumatic stress disorder and family relations and toxic friendships. And it's just what I had to write. And some people are not going to like it, and some people are going to connect very heavily to it. And I can't change anything about that.
Has anyone reached out to you yet and was like, oh no, I'm not ready for this in a way?
I've gotten a few like comments and stuff on Instagram. Like people are scared. And like, you probably should be, but it's, if you want to put this one on hold, wait till next year. I have a rom-com coming out. This sometimes you're filet mignon and people want a hamburger, and that's fine.
I like it.
Oh, I'm using that for the rest of my life.
I like that down.
That's my new Instagram bio. Thank you for that.
Very welcome.
For the entire group, I mean, this is going to be, the fun portion where we kind of all get to talk with each other and really have a conversation. It's kind of hard to ignore everything that has happened throughout the year. But, as Leah mentioned earlier, we talked about this slightly of how when, people are making decisions right now on how the pandemic is kind of affecting their writing. The use of masks, whether this is kind of like an alternative universe and like we're just going to pretend that this is not happening. How has that affected your writing in a way? Has it contributed anything? Did it make you think differently in terms of different points of view or different kinds of stories you wanted to tell? Or has it not affected it at all and made you just want to be like, I'm going to stick to the fantasy that I'm living in my head?
I'll go. I'm working on something, and I'm purposely setting it in the 1960s because I can't do the masks. I have to wait a little bit and see where we're going with this. But if I do, and when I do return to contemporary, I don't know. I just don't want to put masks in my story. Like, I'm hoping that we'll be through this by the time I'm ready to go back. But more power to those who are using masks in their stories. I'd like to pretend that they don't exist right now.
For sure. I think Francisco actually said something really beautiful earlier, and that's that sometimes the book you're meant to write, you can't write in that moment because you just don't have you don't have the capacity to write it. Maybe like that's emotional capacity. Maybe that's like, the craft perspective of things. Like sometimes the book that you want is not always the book for the moment. And I think that one thing the pandemic has done for me is really opened me up to, taking different chances in my work that I wouldn't have taken before, trying to reinvigorate my work with a sense of play. And I think and You Should See Me at Crown, it's a super joyous book, I think. And there are a lot of hijinks and a lot of quirky high school moments. And so one of the things that I want to be able to do in all my books is to sort of bottle that feeling up, but make it feel fresh and new every time. And the pandemic has really given me so much more inspiration to do that, because I'm just everything sucks. This is bleak. I forgot what joy feels like. Human touch, never heard of it, can't relate. And so it's how can I put these things into the work in a way that feels really organic, but also is challenging me to think differently about joy than I would have a year ago or 2 years ago.
My story with this is interesting because my decision was made for me. The Ghost We Keep was originally set in 2021. I kind of just how my brain works. Like books are set in the year that I'm writing them. That way I don't have to think too far about like the future. But my editor, David, he just sent like the huge chunk of like first edits to me, and the note began with like, I changed when this book is set because of the current, situation. And I was like, you know what, that's fair. So that decision was made for me. With book 3, a book that has like air travel and huge weddings and kissing and hand holding all in California, I very purposefully am choosing to ignore that. Just very purposefully, like no mask, no nothing.
I love how you mentioned the state of California too.
I mean, why not? Big old hot spot.
I caught that too. I caught that too.
I was just like, yes.
For me, what stood out this past year for me was sort of the overwhelming lack of compassion that was thrown at us. Like, if you're, you're Black, Indigenous, people of color, if you're LGBTQIA+, if you're a woman, if you're elderly, it was, I think that kind of energy directed at a people is so, it could be so damaging, like deep damaging on a soul level. So I think for me is to use love as a shield is how I do it with my characters. And it's just like, I just write characters that, they could be messy, they could not have things figured out in life, but they have a love for their identities. And so I think that's where I'm being mindful about in this time as I'm writing.
For me, practically, I think it was just my daughter and her husband had to keep on working, so we all kind of like lived together. And they have Willem, who's now 2, and Ella, who's just was being born, and so it's it's very practically very difficult to find a time to write. It was and I never it was like 20 minutes here, 30 minutes there, and then I would forget what I wrote the day before. Like I had to read back and the name of the characters even, it was just really, mentally speaking, it was just like very jagged, there was nothing smooth about it. And, but, it was it just showed me a little, about how just even a little bit every day, whenever you can, still gets you there if you're patient, but I think mostly the way it affected me the most was really the, it's just mentally, is it like a different attitude towards the work, because it was more of a struggle, less inspiration and more like effort.
Yeah. What is one thing that you all want readers to keep in mind prior to reading your books? I mean, Mason, we talked a little bit about your content warning on Instagram, but for everyone else, is there a specific thing that you want them to keep in mind prior to reading?
Yeah, Mason did a content warning on Instagram, and for the first time in anything I've ever written, we have a content warning at the front of my book, because even though it's a love story, it does deal with some heavy themes about grief and trauma and, the loss of people that you didn't think that you could live without. And so, we did front load the book with that, and Mary H.K. Choi describes like content in a book that might be troubling to you as like, it may be emotionally expensive. And so I do think that like in some ways, these topics are emotionally expensive, but I want readers to walk away with this idea that you can hold great joy and great pain in the same hand. They're not necessarily separate things. Sometimes they exist together, and you don't have to earn love through trauma, but sometimes we do go through things, and that brings us closer to the people and the things that we're meant to be. And so, I hope that my readers are able to walk away with that, but also I hope that they feel good when it's over, because I do think it has like a very ebullient, like bright, happy ending, but we had to go through some bumps to get there, and I want them to know that.
I'm with Leah. Can we Leah, just say all that for me? Like take Leah.
Copy and paste it.
Exactly. Like, yeah, content warnings. Enjoy. We all up in there. Thank you. Good night.
And we're done.
I'll say to prepare to leave a little bit Haitian at the end of the book. Like you'll be a little bit Haitian, like at the end of the book, because like, so I was raised by sort of like Haitian New Yorkers. My parents grew up in their whole adult life, they worked in Manhattan hospitals. So like there are people that they could say hello, what's up in like so many different languages. And it's just something that, you know, it's funny because my kids love this picture book called Say Hello by Rachel Isadora, where the little girl walks through the neighborhood and says hello in a different language depending on who she meets. And that is just what the spirit of the story is written. And it's just sort of like, you know, I am from a people that like, you know, like how Black people, how we do when we're on a dance floor. If you are feeling yourself in that moment, we will step aside and go Vivi, you know, like, and we just absorb that energy and we celebrate that special energy that you bring to the table, that you fill the space with. And so it's the same thing, like, you know, we go to a parade and sample the food and celebrate people celebrating themselves, and just love to see it. And so I would say come to the book with the same spirit. Be prepared, you know, be delighted by what you see. If you want to be delighted, enjoy, take part, and then leave a little bit Haitian.
Can I tack on to Debbie's answer really quickly and just say, like, I'm not Haitian. I'm, you know, Black American, descendant of American chattel slavery. But, you know, I grew up in the Midwest, but Debbie's book, okay, so I read Simone Breaks All the Rules, and the first chapter, I feel like it's like the first scene where they're like negotiating who's going to go to prom together. And there's like two moms who are like, well, you know, we can make that happen. Like these are the parameters. This is how we're going to have to do.
Yeah, they're arranged.
Yeah. And I was just like, immediately, I was like, oh, I am so into this, because it's just like, it's so culturally specific without feeling voyeuristic as someone who's like not a part of that culture. And it's so fun and smart and funny. And I'm Debbie's #1 fan. And so everybody go pre-order the book.
Yeah, I love it. Thank you. Thank you so much for saying that. You know, you just never know when you put something out in the world, how it's going to be received. So hearing you say that, Leah, means the world. Hearing what Tamara said about it too. Yeah, because you're just writing from the love, and you have such love for readers that, you know, you just hope that it shines through. And so thank you for saying that. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't read all of you guys' books, but, you know, I have a feeling that within one or two pages of somebody reading them, they're going to get a tone that is life affirming, despite the fact of the, you know, heavy subject matter. And that's easily like that's, you can sense that almost immediately. I think a reader, you know, young reader will pick up, you know, this is hopeful, you know. So I don't know. I think that's going to come true, you know, in all our books, is the sense that there's funny, there's humor, you know, there's hope, despite the fact that we're discussing some things that are very serious.
Yeah. I'm sure a lot of the people who are going to be watching this, a lot of the teens who are going to be watching this, you know, they're inspiring writers themselves. Is there a piece of writing advice that you can share with them that you wish you knew when you were a teen?
I can go. I'm very wary about giving like writing advice out, because advice is never universal. Like nothing ever works for everyone. You know, like I can tell someone to write 1,000 words a day and just keep pushing. It's like, that might not work. But one thing I think that I've sort of like settled on that I think can actually be applicable to everyone is that it's not a race. It's never a race. Think of it more as like we're all on like the same hiking trail with the same destination, and some people, you know, want to take the longer route and look at the scenery, stop and take pictures, or even like go back and, you know, look at some greenery. And some people just want to get to the end, and they get to the end quicker than others. And so it's never a race between people or yourself or published authors or unpublished or unagented That's a weird word. Authors without agents versus authors with agents. Like, it's never a race. Just take your time and be nice to yourself, and just take it easy.
I have some advice. So I wish that I had been told in high school that you don't need to write a story from like start to finish and everything, like in order. I didn't learn that until I became a whole adult. So some of my stories, I know the end before I even know the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
So, and they didn't teach me that in high school. You start from the beginning, the middle, and the end. It's in every graphic organizer and story map, even in elementary school. And I do wish that was a skill that I had learned a long time ago, because now that's how I write some of my stories. With Muted, I knew exactly how Muted ended. I had no idea how it was going to start. I just knew the last sentence of the book, and that was wild for me to have to work backwards that way. But you can absolutely do it if that's what you choose to.
Yeah, I think I've like, this is two-pronged. One is that, like, y'all both said, keep your eyes on your own paper. How you write, how you arrive at publication, if publication is something you're interested in pursuing, is going to be your journey and your journey alone. I remember I was like, when I got started, I was checking for everybody. I was like, okay, so what are they doing? How did they do it? Like, how can I mold my path to like make it as close to like Nick Stone's as possible? Like, okay, she's the blueprint. There is no blueprint. Like, we got to blow the blueprint idea up. Like, your story, your journey is going to be your journey. And I think, like, to that end, a lot of us are told what types of stories are going to sell and what types of stories can exist well in the market, and, a bunch of other like capitalist mumbo jumbo. First of all, abolish capitalism. But second of all, think about your story for what it is you want to do, like, and what you're trying to say. Like, you don't got to put a rich, skinny, cis, straight white girl as the center of your story in order for it to be publishable, or in order for it to, reach the readers it's supposed to reach. Like, your story is going to be your story. If only somebody had told me that queer Black girls from middle of nowhere, Indiana, have a chance at, like, sitting on a panel with like just legends, like left and right, then I would have been like, nah, you're making that up. Get out of my face. But as it turns out, they would have been right. So take my advice.
I want to add to that, Leah, because what you said about where you're from and how you are like putting that on the platform and letting us, see it and know Indiana and their prom crazed selves, and, that there are Black people there, that there are queer people there. And so, like, I would say that to readers is like, look around, like where you are, just because, you may not be from the big city. Take it from me. I was raised in Jersey in the shadow of New York City. Talk about inferiority complex. Every time we turn on the radio, every time we turn on TV, New York, none of this. And so, like, but there's something amazing and interesting about where you are. It may not have the clout that you think it needs to have. It may not have, the shine, but if you do, like, let it feed you and look around and absorb it and tell other people about it. I mean, I think that's one great thing about contemporary literature, is that you can really like paint that picture. I mean, and people will feel it. Like, I would read Anne of Green Gables and just be like, word, like about all the nature. I would be feeling her environment. So I think that's what I would tell writers.
One of the things that helped me a lot when I was a teenager, I started writing in a journal, and I still do it almost every day. I just got in the habit, because a journal, one of the things about a journal is that nobody else will read it, right? And my family has been instructed to burn everything as soon as I die, and it's in my will and testament. But one of the things that doing that, day after day after day, and is that you get rid of the censor. because you forget about it, and then when you start writing novels, you're actually like flowing in that same kind of space without like wondering, is it going to sell, am I going to be liked, and so forth, because you've created this habit of like proceeding without worrying about it. So my journal has been very, very helpful to me.
Unfortunately, we're almost out of time. So, but how I like to end all my panels is through a rapid fire kind of questions, which and or of different things that I'm sure people are going to be interested in finding out. So, rapid fire, here we go. I promise these are going to be super easy. Just speak from your heart. We will not judge you in this space.
I'm scared.
I'm ready. This is
Ready?
my favorite thing. Let's get rid of panels altogether.
Ebooks or hard copies?
Hard copies.
Ebooks.
Oh, we got an ebook. Yes, I'm safe. It's fine.
I live in a studio. I don't have space.
Yeah, I was about to say, when I lived in New York, ebooks, but now that I'm back in the Midwest, who cares?
Hardcover or paperback?
Paperback.
Oh yeah, hardcover.
Ooh.
Aesthetically, hardcovers, but for me personally, paperbacks.
Ooh.
I'm gonna say hardcover.
Series or standalones?
Standalone.
Both?
Yeah, standalone for me.
I don't care. Both.
That's tough.
Standalones, I guess. Leah, that's what you write. Okay, yeah.
Heroes or villains?
Villains.
Villains.
Queer-coded villains specifically.
Yes, that works too for me.
Yeah.
An author who inspired you when you were younger?
Becky Albertalli.
Oh, nice. Toni Morrison for me.
Oh, yes.
Morrison.
How much younger?
Let's do like when you're 13.
Oh,
13.
Or any,
Sarah
really.
Wilson.
Oh,
Yeah.
Rudolfo Anaya, one of the Chicano writers for me.
Debbie, did you say?
Well, I was saying Toni Morrison, but then I was like 13. I think it was like Francine Pascal or something,
And then book that made you fall in love with reading. I know this one's a hard one.
Oh, you can't ask that.
I can ask that. I'm the moderator of this panel.
That's what our questions I want. Let's see.
This is a hard one, I know.
Fall in love.
You mean like from childhood or like now?
Yeah, childhood. No, from childhood.
Oh
It
boy.
really sparked it.
Okay, I have an answer to that. I was a big V.C. Andrews reader back in the day.
A lot of people, yeah.
Yeah, and those stories were so inappropriate for me at the time. I didn't know,
Yeah.
but I devoured all of her books.
You usually are inappropriate, I feel like.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go with Stargirl.
Ooh.
Yeah. I just remember having a really intense, like, emotional reaction to that book. Like, I cried, and I can't even remember now if it's a book where you should cry, but I was just, it was so beautiful. I love it.
I think mine's just as inappropriate. It was Misery by Stephen King. Should not read that when you're 11.
Like Gabriel Garcia Marquez with 100 Years of Solitude was really touching for me.
Francisco, you were like a genius child. Like, I know. You were so...
I am not worthy.
You were so much farther along. I'm like, Stargirl, it has 12 words, 3 pages. And Francisco's like, 100 Years of Solitude, actually. I was writing my dissertation at 8 years old.
Yeah. You also make up a lot of things when you get older, so...
I was a big fan of reading sports pages in the Daily News. So Mike Lupica, who writes children's books now,
Wow.
I used to love his articles in the New York Daily News. Like, I would like devour them. And
love that.
I love the Mets, so like I would as a kid.
Wow. That's
I don't know why that's
Got that
funny.
from.
Just little Debbie just popping out the newspaper. What's in the sports page today?
Yeah, I didn't
Oh my
expect that.
god.
I can't wait for that.
The bad thing about it is I said that once before. My husband pointed out that Costanza on Seinfeld, like he couldn't
Oh
come
my
up with the
God.
book that because he wasn't a reader. He was like Mike Lupica, like so now I'm actually using like Mike Lupica as a. Sorry, it's very New York. Sorry.
No, I love it. I love it. Thank you all so very much for joining me today. Once again, thank you to Scholastic and I Read YA for asking me to moderate this panel. This was such a joy for me. And like everyone who's watching this, pre-order all these books. They're amazing. They're fantastic. You're going to want to read them over and over again and support these wonderful authors because they're just incredible. I loved this panel so much. Thank y'all.
Thank you. This was
Thanks so
awesome.
much.
Good job, Tamara.
Thank you.